Happy Monday to you all. I am Dan D. Federicis with this special edition of Talking Saratoga. I'm here with my co-host, Adam Israel. Robin Dalton could not make today's special edition. We are honored today with a special guest, Harry Wilson, a businessman from nearby Johnstown, New York. And he is running in the tomorrow's Republican primary for New York State Governor. A little bit about Harry that I was able to find out. Again, he's from nearby Johnstown, upstate. That's great. He's first in his family to attend college. He has an MBA from Harvard. He served in the U.S. Treasury Department. He was on the 2009 Auto Industry Task Force. He is no stranger to New York State politics. In 2010, he was narrowly defeated by current Comptroller Thomas DiNapoli for that office of Comptroller. Mr. Wilson, welcome, and thank you for coming on.
Good morning, guys. Great to be with you both.
All right.
Great. If you could start off, some Republican voters know who you are and some don't. So who is Harry Wilson? Why are you running? What's your platform? What's your vision? And why should they vote for you tomorrow?
Sure. So the reason I'm running is I'm a businessman, not a politician. I've spent my entire career at the highest levels of American business fixing broken companies. And I think that's exactly the skill set we need to fix the most broken state government in the country. I don't think we need another politician, which I think is the prime reason we're in this mess. I think we need someone who actually has a proven skill set to fix a broken state government. So at a personal level, I grew up, as you said, in Johnstown, first generation Greek American. My mom moved there from Greece 11 months before I was born. My dad was born there to two Greek immigrants who changed the name to Wilson and Ellis Island. So it used to be Federicis, became Wilson. And I grew up in a working class family. My dad was a bartender at the Rainbow Restaurant, which my uncle owned. My mom operated a sewing machine at the Johnstown Knitting Mill. First, my family go to college, went to Harvard and Harvard Business School, and that really launched me on my career of fixing broken companies. I did my first turnaround when I was 22 years old, and I've fixed companies ranging from General Motors to Sotheby's to Yahoo, the biggest trucking company in the country, the biggest nursing home chain in the country. We've saved hundreds of thousands of American jobs going through very tough situations, much like New York State. Companies have been mismanaged, just like New York State, and really kind of coming in, addressing the core issues and fixing it to make sure that the company, or in this case, the state, worked for the taxpayers and voters in New York. So I combine that ability to actually fix the state, which everybody else, in my opinion, is running to manage the decline, which is not acceptable. And the second part is I'm the only Republican who's come close to winning statewide in the last 20 years. So as you said, I almost beat Tom DiNapoli, very popular incumbent. I don't think anybody else who's run against him has come within 30 points, and I almost beat him. No one else running statewide has come within 13 points in the last 20 years. And so that's, I combine the ability to actually win in November with the ability to actually fix the state, which I think are the two things Republicans need to really consider in thinking about who to vote for tomorrow.
What are the state's broken, right? What are some of the biggest issues that you see, that you hear facing New Yorkers today? New Yorkers are not happy with. Absolutely,
it is consistent across the state, all walks of life, crime, taxes, and cost of living. Now, depending on where you are, where you live, the sequence of those may change, but those consistently come up as the top three. And that's why, my turnaround plan for New York, which I'll explain, is focused on those three things. Like, one of the things I focus on in business is you solve the core problems. And politicians like to talk about everything and accomplish nothing. I'm really focused on delivering on the three key things that really matter. So on taxes, we have the highest taxes in the country. It's destroying families, driving out jobs and businesses, and makes New York unaffordable. And so we have identified $25 billion in spending cuts that we will have in our first budget. That will result in a 20% income tax cut and a 20% property tax cut. Total game changer for all New Yorkers. The second part is, as we know, we're dealing with record high inflation, the highest inflation in 40 years. The governor of New York can't control bad policies coming out of Albany, but he or she can reform the regulations driven by Albany policies that increase the cost of living on food, energy, and housing. And so by tackling those issues that are within the control of state government, the combination of the tax cuts and the reduction in the cost of living are going to put $5,000 a year into the pockets of middle-class families. And the third and final piece is crime. I believe that much of the spike in crime statewide over the last 3 years is driven by bad Albany policies. And we would reverse many of those, reform the rest, and put that all as part of our first budget, because that's how they were passed in the first place. They were passed by Cuomo and Hochul as part of the budget. And so we would reverse that through the first budget as well. So that's all part of the turnaround plan. Those are the three key pillars. And so by the end of 2023, and we're happy to talk through how we get it through Democratic legislature and all those important topics. But by the end of 2023, we will live in a state that is far more prosperous, far more affordable, and far safer than it is today.
Is it fair, Mr. Wilson, to describe you as maybe a little more moderate than your primary opponents in this race? You maybe a George Bush or a George Pataki kind of Republican, more so than a hard conservative?
Well, I wouldn't say that. And so, first of all, I would definitely not call myself a George Bush Republican for many reasons. I consider myself a Reagan Republican if I had to pick one person. But I actually think I am more conservative than my opponents on fiscal issues because I actually walk the walk. A lot of Republicans talk about cutting spending and being disciplined fiscally. When they get into office, they just spend like drunken sailors, just like the Democrats do. And so that's the core problem. They're politicians on both sides of the aisle are much more interested in getting reelected than they are in helping you and me. And so I actually really believe in fiscal conservatism because I think every dollar that the state government takes in is a dollar that someone worked hard to get. Whether it was my parents growing up when my dad was making $7,000 a year, me today where I've been very blessed financially, or anybody in between, and so we should take as little as we need to serve the core purpose of the government, use those dollars as wisely as we can, as effectively as we can, but no more than that. And sadly, very few people in public life think that way. You couldn't survive in business and not think that way, right? Because otherwise you're out of business. But the state has the power to tax, and they can defer that issue for a long time, even though we're in a slow death spiral. So I think I'm more conservative on those issues, and I think in general, my philosophy is of a limited government conservative across the board. Now that means on fiscal issues, that means low taxes, low regulation, limited spending. For example, on socialist on abortion, I'm pro-choice. So it's a consistently limited government philosophy across the board on all issues, as opposed to kind of a hodgepodge that some of my opponents have.
Yeah, that brings up a point of there were two Supreme Court rulings that came down that both really, in my view, had to do with states' rights. Since what a state right can impose and can't impose. What are your feelings on both the abortion, the Roe v. Wade being overturned, and then the Second Amendment, New Yorkers being able to more easily concealed carry?
Sure. So consistent with my overall philosophy, I'm a staunch defender of the Second Amendment. I believe the rights of law-abiding citizens should be generally should not be infringed, and any kind of deviation from that has to be really carefully thought through. I think the core problem is criminals and other bad actors. We talk about that. But to come back to your question on the Supreme Court decisions, I think both were expected. And I think both have been predictably demagogued by politicians. The Supreme Court decision on concealed carry was largely focused on the issue of having objective standards for permitting. And New York is one of only 6 states that had subjective standards, and that's led to all kinds of unfair outcomes depending on which county you live in. And so that, I think, was properly decided based on the Constitution. And I think it really kind of brings the question of what's the, kind of the proper process to make sure that law-abiding citizens have rights to, kind of legal firearms, and people who are not law-abiding citizens don't. So that's on the first decision. On the second decision, also, as we talked about, kind of very expected. Look, the laws of New York State are already broader than the protections that had been part of Roe v. Wade. And I've said publicly that even though a number of parts of the law make me personally uncomfortable, particularly the kind of late-term abortions and the allowing for non-medical professionals to perform abortions, I think those are not, that's not where I personally feel comfortable. But I've also said I'm running to turn around the state. I'm not running on a social agenda, and that's why I've kind of really not focused on those issues as much as I have on crime, taxes, and cost of living.
Mr. Wilson, I think I could speak for Adam and myself. We're both gun owners. I'm a retired state trooper, but yet we see need for some limited gun control with these horrible school shootings and other shootings. How do we protect gun rights of citizens, but stop these school shootings and other shootings that are just horrific?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were a retired state trooper. So I think that's terrific. And thank you for your service. Yeah, I have two cousins who in law enforcement. One is a retired police officer in my hometown in Johnstown. The other is a current state trooper. And so, something that I've lived my whole life through, my family members, and spent a lot of time thinking about. And the other thing on the gun control piece of it that you're raising, I'm the only candidate who grew up upstate. And so I started shooting when I was 8 years old. In the backyard with my dad, and everybody I knew had a gun. We had multiple guns. I'm a gun owner today. And it was just something that everybody did, and no one I knew ever did anything wrong. And yet now I live in Westchester, where, it's a totally different perspective on the issue. I actually think it's the biggest cultural divide in our state based on where you grew up and how you grew up. And I've been dealing with kind of explaining this issue and the importance of the Second Amendment to my friends who don't really understand it as well for a long, long time. And the point I've been making consistently for 30 years is that, listen, the rights of law-abiding citizens shouldn't be infringed, because I think that's part of the Second Amendment. That does not mean that you can't take steps to make sure that people who are bad actors don't have access to guns. And so to me, that the answer has always been around, efficient, reasonable background checks, which today we have very extensive background checks, but they're not, for example, they don't link to mental health issues. So you can get through a background check, have a mental health problem, and that not show up in the screening process. So and that's, to me, I think you ask anybody with common sense, that's a fundamental question you'd want to understand. Yet when I needed to get my dad's gun, my dad passed away. I wanted to get his World War II service revolver as a memento of my father. It took me like 6 months to get that taken care of, all legally, all properly. And so that's the core problem, is how do you make sure that you kind of have an efficient and effective process? And that's where we fall down, which I think is largely a failure of bureaucracy. And so if we kind of streamline the process but focus on the issues that really matter, I think you can, not just preserve the rights of law-abiding citizens, but actually maximize them, but not have guns get into the hands of bad actors. And I keep saying bad actors, but there are really three categories of people. They're criminals, they're the mentally ill with violent tendencies, and they're purveyors of hate, like this monster who drove from Conklin to Buffalo for the Tops massacre. And in all three cases, we do a terrible job in New York State. And in all three cases, they're preventable, not perfectly preventable, but very preventable. And so, we, for the reason crime is such a core focus of ours, is we just had a breakdown in policy over the changes over the last 3 years. And we have kind of a breakdown in effectiveness. So for example, there had been a very effective disruption of the iron pipeline for illegal guns coming into the hands of criminals in New York State from other states. And that was largely abandoned, in part by Mayor de Blasio in New York City, but largely abandoned over the last few years. So we had something that was working, and yet we just walked away from it because of a liberal ideology. On the mentally ill, we've actually reduced our allocation for psychiatric beds for the mentally ill. It's down to about 15% over the last 3 years. So despite spending $220 million in this incredibly bloated state budget, we've actually reduced spending on one of the things that actually matters the most, and is increasing today. And so, when you talk to friends in law enforcement, they say, listen, one of the biggest problems we have is we don't have capacity to deal with people with mental illness issues. I don't necessarily have that. I, Mr. Deputy or member of the police force, don't necessarily have that training. And so it's a lose-lose for the person, for the law enforcement, for society. And so we need to kind of invest in that area. And then the third is, these purveyors of hate. Each of both in the horrible massacre in Buffalo and in Uvalde, both of those monsters had digital footprints that were clearly telegraphing what they were going to do. And there are no consequences for the people who are basically idle bystanders who didn't report that. There should be severe consequences for those people. That's going to increase reporting. And there should be some limited kind of assessment of that. So, for example, you could write algorithms that don't violate anyone's First Amendment rights. But if you see someone constantly referring to violence or shooting people through the algorithms, you're not actually surveilling anybody. We can have early warning signs, and both of these monsters had early warning signs. So those were preventable catastrophes if we were focused on the core issues, which has nothing to do with their access to legal guns, but everything to do with the issues we just talked about.
We know you just have a couple minutes for us here. Adam, you had an important question you want to ask about landlords and landlords' rights and so forth. Did you want to put that in?
Yeah, well, you know, I'm a small business guy too, and the New York State during COVID really, I consider it an unfunded mandate, right? They told landlords like you could not evict a tenant for non-payment, which if the state wants to help people stay in their homes, they can do that. But you know, what is your thought on that? I guess.
Yeah, I think this is like many issues in the state where the state only sees, they don't see both sides of it. And so like I've heard this from so many landlords across the state, particularly small landlords who can't afford to float the rent of their tenants. They've got maintenance costs, they've got utility costs. And as a result, you end up having this mismatch where landlords get hurt unfairly. And so I don't believe we should have a moratorium. I think landlords should have the ability to enforce their rights under their contracts. I think that's fundamental to capitalism and American democracy. And to the extent that the government wants to make a public policy view on helping those people, they can do that by subsidizing them, not by, you know, basically kind of forcing landlords to subsidize them.
Oh, two quick questions about Saratoga. Oh, sorry, Adam, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say the podcast is Saratoga. We'll hit you a little Saratoga and let you go, Mr. Wilson. But
sure.
Again, let's hear it.
Okay. On Saratoga, one, you may have heard we have a horse racing track in this city. In fact, we have two of them. It's important to the economy. Governor Cuomo was not a fan of horse racing. I won't say he went after horse racing, but he was clearly not a fan. He said as much. What is your connection to horse racing? Are you a fan? What do you know about it?
Yeah, so it goes way back. So I grew up in Johnstown, so not far from Saratoga. We used to go to the track all the time. And one of my uncles in particular was a diehard. And so we were there a lot. And then I grew up next to a horse farm. And so when I was a little kid, remember the Black Stallion book series?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, so I loved that book series. And so I was a little kid. I read all the books. I wanted to be a jockey. Well, I kind of outgrew jockey. You can't see me fully, but I'm more built like a high school linebacker than a jockey. And so I kind of, you know, some dreams die young. My dream of being a jockey died when I was about sixth grade. But I had a long-standing interest in the industry and a long-standing supporter because I think it is essential. I wouldn't say it's essential to the economy, although it's important to the economy. It's essential to the character of Saratoga and the region. And that's really important in for culturally and for the dynamics of the community. And I think, so I'm a big fan of the industry. I think, I know it's had lots of financial challenges. I have not dug into the underlying reasons for those financial challenges. I know part of it is the denial of VLT revenue, and that obviously is not right and not fair. But what I would want to do is kind of work with the industry to make sure it's sustainable over the long term, because I think it is a crown jewel of upstate New York and of the region.
Thank you. And a related issue, when the Saratoga Casino opened, I believe in 2006, the money from the video lottery terminals, the VLT, some of that money went to the host communities to offset the police responses, the fire responses. Casino's a sizable facility. But that money, probably since Patterson, since Governor Cuomo, since Governor Hochul, it's always taken away in the governor's first proposed executive budget. And you got to beg the legislature to put it back in. That's a broken promise. Will you commit to keeping Saratoga and the other host communities in the state to continue receiving their VLT money that they were promised? Absolutely.
Absolutely. Look, I remember I'm a business guy, not a politician. I think politicians do things like that to exert power and horse trade. From a business standpoint, I look at it contractually. If there's a counterparty that expects as a promise to receive certain funding, you can't plan if you're not getting the money on a timely basis, or you're not sure you're going to get the money at all. And so I think that's fundamental to the way to actually conduct business properly. I think the state creates so much friction. This is a classic example where, because of kind of bad judgments by politicians in Albany, you end up creating so much friction that has a ripple effect for everybody else. And so the cost to the town of Saratoga, for example, of dealing with it, none of that's necessary, but it gets created when you have this political gamesmanship. And so that's why a big focus of mine is simplify, 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 make sure you live up to your promises. And I think that ends up creating a lot of opportunity where people can spend things on thinking about how to grow, as opposed to just kind of fighting over the same small pie.
Okay.
All right. Then I got one last question, possibly the most polarizing one a New Yorker can ask, but Mets or Yankees, Mr. Wilson? Who do you got?
Yankees.
All right.
He was quick. Pick one. In Saratoga fashion, pick tomorrow's superfecta. Pick the order of finish in tomorrow's Republican primary.
I'm going to say Wilson, Zeldin, Giuliani, Astorino.
Okay, wow. Okay, listen, we wish you the best of luck. Thank you for coming on. Your staff was terrific. They were really the best staff. They reached out to us before we even reached out to you.
Excellent.
And we wish you the best of luck, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you. Great to see you guys. Thanks so much for the time.
All right. We'll talk to you later. Dan, you want to stay out a minute? We'll chat?
Yes, I'll end the broadcast.
Let's get back to the campaign trail. I'm sure he's got a busy day.
Take care, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, guys. Take care.